Hey guys, I'm going to take you through a hub assembly replacement on a 2013 Pathfinder. I'm using my GoPro for one of the first times in a long time, so this is going to be kind of an experiment. Hopefully it's not too wobbly and jiggly for you, but anyways, so I got the wheel off with my 21mm socket, of course. We got a nice big cotter pin here on the axle. This is an all-wheel drive 2013, or else there would not be a nut on an axle back here. There would be no axle. And on the way back in, I'm going to put some anti-seize on this so it never has an issue coming out. So this is a 32mm, I believe. Yes, it is. My impact of choice, the Milwaukee. Don't forget to look up the proper torque spec from Nissan when reinstalling this axle nut. So the caliper is held onto the bracket with 14mm pins. Look at that, my ratcheting wrench. Oh, there we go. Just woke up. The symptoms are the classic humming noise coming from this this rear left side of the Pathfinder while driving, and it doesn't even have to be on the ground. I put it up in the air on the lift, and I could hear it just as well as when I'm driving it for a test drive. Usually the wheel bearings start to hum, and then they start to get louder and louder with more wear and tear on them. This one has 146,000 miles on it. And so this is a Pathfinder thing and Nissan thing that I've seen. The bottom caliper guide pin for the caliper starts to hit this whatever you want to call it, trailing arm. So if you swing it down, you can kind of sneak it. I thought I've snuck it around before. No, maybe not. And check out the pads, those are getting pretty low. I always make sure to remember which one's inside and which one's outside. Usually the outside one you can't have the wear indicator on the outside because it'll hit it the wrong way. You know what? This one, the caliper won't be able to reinstall because of this, so it usually goes on the back side of the rotor. So the caliper bracket is held on with two pretty big 19mm bolts. So I got my 19 here. And what I do when you can't fit in a half-inch breaker bar, what I do is I put a 6-point, when I can, a 6-point wrench onto the bolt, and then I'll use my baby sledge and break the bolts free. And I'll even use the shank here on the baby sledge, just so I know that it's not going to slip, because this is a little bit more difficult to use than just using the shank. and it works very well. So there's the top one. And don't forget when you're reinstalling these to look up the Nissan torque, the torque for these two caliper guide bolts. Sorry, caliper bracket mounting bolts is what I meant to say. And because I worked on this car last, none of these are going to have an issue coming out because I put a little bit of anti-seize on each bolt, and you'll never have an issue with it corroding or rusting to the other, to the bolt hole. Oops, I just dropped the washer and it went flying. It's over near the garage door. So now I can separate the bracket from the pin. I'm going to put the bracket on the ground and I'm going to hang my caliper to take the stress off the flex hose on a nice OTC caliper hanger. OTC 7661 is the part number. So usually I'll go right through the guide pin hole and hang it up like that. And if I can, I'll try and get it nice and low to get it out of my way. Yeah, this should work fine. So now we got to take the rotor off. Sometimes the parking brake shoes are inside the drum of the rotor, and they'll be holding the rotor on semi-tight. Or if the rotor is really old, you might have to use your baby sledge or a hammer and hit it between the lugs. Here, 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 just go around. And I mean give it good whacks. And that way it'll crack and break the corrosion and rust from around the hub to the rotor. But since I've already done the brakes on this car, I put a little bit of anti-seize on the inside of the rotor where it touches the hub, so it's nice and it's not going to have any issues. But if your rotor is original or it's old and wearing, pretty worn, you might have to take out this rubber plug and use a flathead screwdriver, go into this hole and change, hit the little adjuster gear that's in there so that the parking brake shoes collapse a little bit and retract. And then when you put the rotor back on, obviously you need to hit that adjuster again and feel so that the rotor has a little bit of drag, just like it does now. You want it to have a little bit of drag when you're putting it on and off, and it's perfectly adjusted right now. So what I should have said though was you might have to spin the rotor to find the gear adjuster, and just use a flashlight, poke it, shoot it right through the hole, And for example, the adjuster on this one is right up here. So you'll be using your flathead and spinning this adjuster. So, but anyways, I'll put the rotor down. I'm going to put the rubber plug back on. If you lose that rubber plug, you have to replace it, or else you're probably going to get a lot of water and salt, and wherever you live, water and salt inside that hole, and it'll rust your parking brake shoes and the adjusters. This is a pretty standard setup for a rear e-brake, e-brake or parking brake, whatever you want to call it. These are the shoes. This is the adjuster, springs, another spring, another part of the mechanism. So anyways, this is, as you can see, this isn't that bad of a job, because all we have left is 4 17mm bolts that are holding the hub in from the inside. And hopefully hopefully I got a good view for you guys. There's the end of one of the bolts right there coming through the hub. So what I'll do now is I have a half-inch 17mm socket, and if I make myself a little bit more space here, see, you'll put the socket on all 4 of them. And I'm going to see, for example, if my breaker bar even fits back here, which it really doesn't, because it's just too long. Looks like I'll just make it. So I got my breaker, so I'm going to need a bunch of leverage. This might not be enough. Oh, it is. That was lucky. That was lucky. So, if I keep going around, here's the bottom rear. That's broken free. Make sure to look up the torque spec for these bolts, because it's not as much as you think. If I can loosen these with not much effort, like I just did, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try and just use my half-inch ratchet instead of the breaker bar for some easier clearance here. So ready? Yep. No big deal, as they say. And I'm going to go for my 4th 17. And here's where it's getting a little bit tight, so I'll add a little shorty half-inch extension. And I'll try this again. There we go. So ready? It's not going to take much. Alright, that one took a little more than the rest, but you see what I mean. So now I'm going to spin all 4 of them out. Nice and clean threads, look at that. The car is only a 2013, so you would hope you wouldn't be dealing with some terrible rusty hardware. 2013, it's not washed very often. I can tell from every time I service this car. It's not my car. 2013, 146,000 miles, something like that. Nice clean bolts. And there's number 4. So sometimes you do need to knock this thing off the knuckle with, you know, a hammer or a baby sledge, because there's on the inside of the hub, you know, it sits on the knuckle with, you know, there's a bore that sits on the knuckle. So sometimes it's very rare that you could just grab this and pull it off. One time I was able to, but yeah, see, this thing it's plenty on there. So I'm replacing the whole hub itself. So usually I'll take like an extension, or, you know, my baby sledge with an extension. If you have a hub puller, you'll put the center of the puller right here on the axle. And then I do have a hub puller, but it's not necessary for this. You'll put the jaws on the sides of the hub like this, and you'll push against the axle, and then it should slowly take the hub out of the knuckle. But sometimes you can get lucky and give it some taps. This might be very loud on the video, but you know what? The shield is in the way. The shield and the parking brake shoes are really in the way in this case. See, I don't care if I screw up the hub or the threads for the lugs, because the whole thing's going to be replaced. But I'm going to have to use the proper my puller on this to pull it off. It's too hard to get right behind the hub to get the right angle to bang it off. So I'm going to go ahead and use my puller and pull this guy off. You can rent a puller from any of the auto parts stores like O'Reilly, Advanced Auto, or AutoZone. You can rent them for